The first bride arrived in September. Coulter watched her climb the switchback trail from the window of the main house, her yellow dress catching light like a lantern against the dark pines. She moved slowly, one gloved hand pressed to her chest, pausing every 20 yards to catch her breath. The altitude was merciless up here, 7,000 feet, where the air thinned and the wind never stopped. He didn't go out to meet her. Instead, he stood in the doorway of his father's room, watching the old man sleep. Samuel Hale had been a giant once, 6'4", 240 pounds of lumber camp muscle and scarred knuckles. Now he looked like something the mountain had already swallowed. His skin hung loose over his ribs. His breathing rattled. The fever came and went in waves, and when it spiked, he didn't know where he was anymore. Coulter had watched 3 doctors walk away shaking their heads. The last one, a rail-thin man from Denver with wire glasses and the smell of carbolic soap, had pulled Coulter aside and spoken in the flat, tired voice of someone who'd stopped pretending. There's nothing to be done. Lung fever, consumption, something deeper. I can't say for certain, but he's past the point where medicine matters. Make him comfortable. That's all you can do now. Coulter had paid him anyway. Sent him back down the mountain with $100 and instructions never to return. That had been 3 weeks ago. The yellow dress reached the porch. A knock came. Soft, polite, the kind of knock that expected to be welcomed. Coulter crossed the room and opened the door. She was younger than he'd expected. 22, maybe 23, pale skin, auburn hair pinned up beneath a straw hat, a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't so carefully arranged. She held a small leather case in both hands and smiled like she'd been practicing. Mr. Hale? That's right.
I'm Eleanor Pritchard. Reverend Cass sent word that you might be in need of companionship. Companionship, that's what they were calling it now. Coulter didn't move from the doorway. Who told you to come up here? Her smile faltered. The Reverend said you were a good man, a man of means, that you'd built something worth sharing. Did he mention my father? He said you lived alone. I don't. Her eyes flicked past him, trying to see into the house. Coulter stepped forward, forcing her back a pace. I appreciate you making the trip, he said. But you should head back before dark. Trail's dangerous in low light. Mr. Hale, I'll pay for your time. Wait here. He closed the door before she could argue. Inside, he pulled a $10 note from the desk drawer and returned to the porch. Eleanor was still standing there, case in hand, confusion hardening into something sharper. I don't understand, she said. There's nothing to understand. You came up here looking for something I'm not offering. The Reverend said, the Reverend doesn't know what I need. He pressed the bill into her hand and stepped back inside. Through the window, he watched her stand there for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Then she turned and started back down the trail, yellow dress vanishing into the trees. The second bride came 2 weeks later. This one was older, 30, maybe 35, with dark hair and a direct gaze that didn't soften when Coulter answered the door. She didn't smile, didn't apologize for the intrusion. I'm Caroline Dresch, she said. I'm here about the arrangement. There's no arrangement. Then why did the town council send me? Coulter felt something tighten in his chest. The council. They said you were refusing help out of pride, that someone needed to set you straight. Did they? They also said your father's dying and you're too stubborn to do anything about it. Coulter's hand curled around the edge of the door. My father's condition isn't the council's business. It is if you're letting him suffer because you won't accept a woman's help. I'm not letting him suffer. Then what are you doing? The question landed harder than it should have. Coulter looked past her, toward the woodpile he'd been splitting that morning, toward the barn where the stock needed feeding, toward the creek that needed checking and the fence line that needed mending and the 1,000 other things that didn't stop just because a man was dying. I'm doing what I can, he said quietly. Caroline studied him for a long moment, then she set her bag down on the porch and folded her arms. I've nursed 4 people through their final weeks, she said. I know what dying looks like. I know what it costs the people left standing. If you're doing this alone, you won't last another month. I'll manage. You'll break. Coulter met her eyes. Then I'll break. She didn't leave right away. She stood there on the porch, testing him, waiting for the crack. But Coulter had spent the last 6 months learning how to hold still under pressure, how to keep his voice level when his father screamed in his sleep, how to clean sheets stained with blood and bile without flinching, how to keep moving when every part of him wanted to collapse. Finally, Caroline picked up her bag. "You're a fool," she said. "I've been called worse." She started down the trail. Halfway to the tree line, she turned back. "When he dies," she called, "don't come to the town asking why no one helped." Coulter didn't answer. He watched her disappear into the pines, then went back inside to check on his father. Well, they kept coming. A schoolteacher from Leadville, a widow from Cannon City, a seamstress who'd lost her shop in a fire, a farmer's daughter who looked terrified the entire time she stood on his porch. Coulter turned them all away. The town below started talking. The stories grew teeth. He's got a temper. Ran off a woman who tried to help. He's got a sickness in the head. Doesn't trust anyone. He's waiting for someone who doesn't exist. That last one was closer to the truth than they knew. October came cold and early. The first snow fell on a Tuesday, light and dry, dusting the high ridges and turning the trail into a slick mess of mud and ice. Coulter spent the morning hauling firewood, stacking it against the north wall of the house where the wind wouldn't scatter it. His father had been quiet for 2 days, not sleeping, not exactly, but drifting in some gray space between consciousness and absence. He didn't eat, barely drank. His pulse was thin and irregular. Coulter had stopped trying to count the hours. That afternoon, he was splitting rounds behind the barn when the axe head slipped. It happened fast. 1 second, the blade was biting into the wood. The next, it was glancing off a hidden knot and slicing across the meat of his left thigh. Coulter dropped the axe and staggered backward. Blood poured through his fingers, hot and fast, soaking through his pants and pooling in the dirt. He pressed down hard, but the wound was deep, deep enough that he could feel the edges gaping under his palm. He needed to get inside, needed to stop the bleeding, needed to... The world tilted. He sat down hard in the mud and dirt, still pressing against the wound, watching the blood spread. His vision narrowed at the edges. Somewhere behind him, one of the horses whinnied. "You can't do this alone." Caroline's words thrown back at him from the edge of the trees. "You'll break." Coulter gritted his teeth and tried to stand. His leg buckled. He caught himself on the side of the barn, but the effort cost him. His hand slipped, smearing blood across the weathered wood. He needed help. The thought came sharp and cold, cutting through the haze. He needed help, and there was no one. He didn't remember making it to the house. When he came to, he was lying on the floor of the main room, his leg wrapped in torn bedding, the wound still seeping. The fire in the stove had burned down to coals. Outside, the light was fading. Coulter pulled himself upright and checked the bandage. It wasn't good, but it would hold for now. He'd stitched himself up before. Knife cuts, axe wounds, the kind of damage that came from working alone in a place that didn't forgive mistakes. But this was different. This was the mountain telling him he was running out of time. He limped to his father's room and stood in the doorway. Samuel was awake. Barely. His eyes tracked Coulter's movement, but there was no recognition in them. Just the dull, distant stare of someone who'd already started leaving. "I'm trying," Coulter said quietly. "I'm trying to hold it together." His father didn't answer. The healer came 3 days later. Coulter heard the knock and assumed it was another bride. He ignored it. But the knocking continued, steady, patient, impossible to tune out. Finally, he limped to the door and pulled it open. The woman standing on his porch was old, 70, maybe older, with white hair braided down her back and a face carved into deep lines by decades of sun and wind. She wore a man's coat, patched at the elbows, and carried a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. "You Coulter Hale?" "Depends on who's asking." "Name's Iris Gable. I'm the one who stitched up your leg when you were 8 and fell through the mill saw." Coulter blinked. The memory came back in pieces. Blood, screaming, a woman with strong hands holding him still while she worked. "That was you." "That was me." Iris looked past him into the house. "Heard your father's sick. Heard you've been turning away every soul that tries to help. I don't need... Save it. She pushed past him and walked straight to Samuel's room. Coulter followed, limping, trying to form an argument. But Iris was already at the bedside, her hands moving over Samuel's chest, his throat, his temples. She peeled back one eyelid, then the other, pressed her fingers against the pulse point at his wrist. After a long moment, she straightened. How long's he been like this? 4 months, maybe 5. What have you been doing for him? Everything I can. Broths, willow bark tea, kept him warm, kept him clean. That's maintenance, Iris said, not healing. The doctors said, I don't care what the doctors said. They don't know what I know. Coulter stared at her. You think you can help him? Iris turned to face him fully. Her eyes were sharp, clear, the kind of gaze that cut through pretense. I think he's got a chance, she said, but not if you keep trying to do this alone. I've been managing. You've been dying alongside him. The words hit like a fist to the chest. Coulter opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Iris stepped closer. You need someone who knows how to fight this kind of sick, someone who won't flinch when it gets ugly, someone who will work 20 hours straight if that's what it takes. She paused. You need someone like Mara Vance. Who? A woman I trained, came through here 6 years ago, stayed 2 winters, learned everything I could teach her. She's strong, smart, and she doesn't quit. Iris tilted her head. She's also the least charming person you'll ever meet. The town doesn't like her, calls her cold, says she's got no softness in her. Why are you telling me this? Because you're not looking for soft. You're looking for someone who can save your father's life. Iris picked up her bag. I'll send word to her. If she comes, you listen to what she says. You do what she tells you, and you don't waste her time trying to be the hero. She walked to the door, then stopped. One more thing, she said. If Mara comes up here and fixes this, the town's going to turn on her. They always do. She's not the kind of woman people want to see succeed. Iris looked back at him. You'll need to decide if you're the kind of man who lets that happen. Then she was gone. Mara Vance arrived 8 days later. Coulter was in the barn when he heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, the sound of someone who didn't hesitate. He straightened, wiping his hands on his pants, and stepped out into the cold morning air. She was halfway across the yard. Tall, taller than most men Coulter knew, with broad shoulders and a frame built for labor, not decoration. She wore canvas pants, a wool coat too large for her, and boots that had seen 1,000 miles of trail. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a rough braid. Her face was plain, angular, weathered by wind and work. She didn't smile. She didn't introduce herself. She walked straight up to him and said, You're Coulter Hale. I am. Iris sent me. Said your father's dying and you're too proud to ask for help. That's not... I don't care. Mara shifted the pack on her shoulder. I'm here to see if he can be saved. If he can, I'll do it. If he can't, I'll tell you straight. Either way, you're going to do exactly what I say, when I say it, without argument. Understood? Coulter stared at her. You always this blunt? Yes. Good. For the first time, something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but a flicker of acknowledgement. Show me where he is, she said. Coulter led her into the house. Mara didn't waste time. She went straight to Samuel's room, dropped her pack on the floor, and started working. She checked his pulse, his breathing, the color of his skin. She smelled his breath, pressed her ear against his chest, pulled back the blankets and examined the wasting muscles, the sores forming at pressure points, the way his body had started to turn inward. When's the last time he ate solid food? 3 weeks. Water? I get it in him when I can, couple spoonfuls at a time. Not enough. Mara straightened. He's dehydrated, malnourished. His lungs are weak, but they're not gone. This isn't consumption. The doctors didn't know what they were looking at. She turned to face him. Your father's got lung fever, but that's secondary. The real problem is his body's given up. He's not eating because he can't taste anything. He's not drinking because his throat's too raw. Every system's shutting down one piece at a time. Can you stop it? Mara met his eyes. Maybe, but it's going to take everything I've got and everything you've got. I'll do whatever you need. I'm going to hold you to that. She started pulling supplies from her pack, dried herbs, tinctures in glass vials, lengths of clean cloth. She worked with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice, her hands moving fast and sure. I need water boiling, she said, clean linens, a pot of broth, bone broth, nothing light. And I need you to clear out of here so I can work. Coulter hesitated. I should stay. In case you need... I don't need you hovering. I need you doing what I tell you. Mara didn't look up. Go. He went. For the next 3 days, Mara barely left Samuel's side. Coulter watched from the doorway, from the hall, from anywhere he could stand without getting in her way. He brought water, broth, firewood, fresh linens. He did everything she asked, and when she didn't ask, he found something else to do. Fixed the loose hinge on the barn door, repaired a section of fence, hauled in enough wood to last a month. But mostly, he watched. Mara worked like someone fighting a war. She forced water down Samuel's throat, drop by drop. She made him drink bitter teas that smelled like rotting bark. She massaged his chest, his arms, his legs, keeping the blood moving, keeping the muscles from atrophying completely. When he thrashed, she held him still. When he cried out, she spoke in a low, steady voice that cut through the delirium. You're not dying today. You hear me? Not today. And somehow, impossibly, it started to work. On the 4th day, Samuel opened his eyes and recognized Coulter. Where am I? His voice was a ruined rasp, barely audible. Home, Coulter said. You're home. Samuel's gaze drifted to Mara, who was standing at the foot of the bed, arms folded. Who's that? Someone who's keeping you alive. Samuel studied her for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes again. Mara glanced at Coulter. He's not out of it yet, but we're past the worst. Coulter felt something crack open in his chest. Relief, exhaustion, gratitude, all of it spilling out at once. Thank you, he said. Mara shrugged. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long way to go. By the end of the first week, the rumors had started. Coulter heard them when he rode into town for supplies, whispers in the general store, pointed looks from the women outside the church. A man he'd known for years crossed the street to avoid passing him on the sidewalk. At the feed store, the clerk, a thin man named Horace with a perpetual frown, didn't bother hiding it. Heard you've got a woman living up there now. Coulter set a sack of grain on the counter. I've got help, that's all. Help? Horace's mouth twitched. That what they're calling it? You got a problem. Say it plain. No problem. Just interesting is all. Man refuses every decent woman in the territory, then brings in some... He paused, choosing his words. Some strange woman to live under his roof. She's a healer. So I heard. Also heard she's got a reputation. For what? Horace leaned forward. For not being the kind of woman a man brings home, if you know what I mean. Coulter's hand tightened around the edge of the counter. I don't. Come on, Hale. You're smarter than that. Woman like her. Big, plain, no husband, no family, living alone, working like a man. He shook his head. People talk. Let them. They're saying she's immoral, that you're immoral for keeping her up there. Coulter straightened. My father's alive because of her. That's the only thing that matters. Maybe to you. To anyone with sense. Horace rang up the grain, his expression sour. Suit yourself, but don't come crying when the whole town turns its back on you. Coulter paid and left. When he got back to the mountain, Mara was outside splitting wood. She'd stripped down to her shirt sleeves despite the cold, and sweat darkened the fabric across her back. The axe rose and fell in a steady rhythm, each strike clean and precise. A pile of split rounds grew beside her. Coulter dismounted and started unloading supplies. You don't have to do that. I can handle the wood. I'm doing it anyway. You've been working nonstop for a week. You should rest. I'll rest when there's time to rest. Coulter set down a sack of flour and watched her work. She moved like someone who'd spent her life doing hard labor. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The wood split clean every time. They're talking about you in town, he said. Mara didn't pause. I know. They're saying, I know what they're saying. It doesn't bother you? No. Coulter waited for more, but she just kept swinging the axe. Why not? He asked finally. Mara stopped. She straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, and turned to face him. Because I stopped caring what people think a long time ago, she said. They don't like me because I don't fit into their idea of what a woman should be. I'm too big, too plain, too direct. I don't smile enough, don't soften my voice, don't apologize for taking up space, she shrugged. They can think whatever they want. Doesn't change what I am. And what's that? Useful. The word landed with the weight of absolute certainty. Coulter looked at her, this woman the town dismissed, the woman who'd walked onto his mountain and pulled his father back from the edge of death, and realized she was right. She wasn't charming, wasn't soft, wasn't easy, but she was exactly what he needed. They're going to keep talking, he said. Let them. They might do more than talk. Mara picked up the axe again. Then we'll deal with it when it happens. She went back to splitting wood. Coulter stood there for a moment longer, then carried the rest of the supplies inside. Samuel improved slowly. By the second week, he was eating solid food. By the third, he could sit up without help. Mara pushed him hard, made him walk, made him work his arms and legs, refused to let him slip back into passivity. You're not an invalid, she told him one afternoon when he complained about the exercises. You're recovering. There's a difference. I'm tired. Then rest after you finish. I can't. Yes, you can. Samuel glared at her, but he kept moving. Coulter watched from the doorway, half expecting his father to argue. But Samuel just grumbled and obeyed. There was something in Mara's presence, some quiet authority that didn't invite defiance. Later, after Samuel had fallen asleep, Coulter found Mara in the kitchen making tea. He listens to you, Coulter said, because I don't give him a choice. Most people would let him rest. Most people would let him die. Mara poured the tea and handed him a cup. Your father's strong, stronger than he thinks. But if I let him decide how hard to push, he'll stop too soon. And then all of this is for nothing. Coulter took the tea. You're harder than any doctor I've met. Doctors quit when the medicine stops working. I don't have that luxury. Why not? She looked at him over the rim of her cup. Because I'm the last option. If I fail, there's no one else coming. The weight of that settled between them. You won't fail, Coulter said. I might. But you won't stop trying. Mara's expression softened, just slightly, just enough to show something beneath the armor. No, she said, I won't. The first confrontation came in early November. Coulter had ridden into town to pick up medicine, something Mara had requested, a tincture the apothecary kept in stock. He was tying his horse outside the shop when Reverend Cass stepped into his path. Mr. Hale, a word. Coulter straightened. Reverend. Cass was a tall man, thin and severe, with the kind of face that looked permanently disappointed. He folded his hands in front of him and smiled, not warmly. I've been hearing troubling reports, he said. About what? About the woman living on your property. Mara's helping my father recover. I'm sure she is. But appearances matter, Mr. Hale. And the appearance of an unmarried woman living alone with two men, well, it's causing concern. Concern for who? For the community. For your reputation. For hers. Coulter felt his jaw tighten. My father was dying. She saved him. That's all that matters. I understand your gratitude, but there are proper ways to go about these things. If Miss Vance is truly a healer, she should be staying in town, visiting your home during the day, not residing there. She needs to be there. My father requires constant care. Then perhaps you should consider bringing him into town. There are good Christian women who could... No, Cass's smile thinned. Mr. Hale, I'm trying to help you. The congregation is asking questions about morality, about decency. If this continues, I can't protect you from their judgment. I didn't ask for your protection. You should. Cass stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're a respected man, Coulter. You've built something valuable. Don't throw it away for the sake of pride. Send the woman away. Let the town provide the help you need. Coulter met his eyes. The town sent me 12 women. None of them could do what Mara's doing. Because none of them were allowed to stay. Because none of them were right. Cass's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Then it's mine to make. He pushed past the Reverend and went into the apothecary. That night he told Mara what had happened. She listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When he finished, she said, "They're going to keep pushing. I know. It'll get worse before it gets better. I know." Mara studied him. "You can still send me away. Find someone else. Someone they'll accept." "There is no one else." "There's always someone else." "Not like you." The words hung in the air between them. Mara looked away, her jaw tight. "You don't know what you're asking for." "I'm asking you to stay." "You're asking me to let them destroy my name, my work, everything I've built." She turned back to him. "Do you understand that? When this is over, when your father's healed and I leave, I'll be the woman who lived with 2 men, who broke every rule, who didn't care about decency or reputation. I'll be unmarriageable, unhireable, unwelcome." "Then don't leave." Mara's eyes widened. "What?" "Don't leave. Stay here. Keep working. Let them say whatever they want." "You're serious?" "Yes." She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You don't owe me that," she said quietly. "I know." "Then why?" Coulter met her gaze. "Because you saved my father's life, because you're the strongest person I've ever met, and because if the town can't see your value, then to hell with the town." Mara didn't answer. She just stood there, something unreadable flickering across her face. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." Bum. The days grew shorter, the snow came heavier, and inside the house on the mountain, Samuel Hale continued to heal. By late November, he was walking without assistance. By December, he was working again, small tasks at first, then larger ones. Splitting kindling, mending tack, helping Coulter with the stock. Mara watched him like a hawk, ready to step in if he pushed too hard. But more often than not, she just stood back and let him work. One afternoon, Coulter found her outside the barn, arms folded, watching Samuel stack firewood. "He's strong again," Coulter said. "He's getting there." "You did that?" Mara shook her head. "He did that. I just made sure he didn't quit." Coulter stood beside her, watching his father work. The old man moved slowly, carefully, but there was strength in his shoulders again, purpose in his movements. "Thank you," Coulter said. Mara glanced at him. "You already thanked me." "I'll keep thanking you until it feels like enough." "It'll never feel like enough." "Then I'll keep going anyway." She almost smiled. "Stubborn." "Learned from the best." They stood together in the cold, watching Samuel work, and for the first time in months, Coulter felt something close to peace. But down in the town below, the storm was just beginning. The first stone came through the window on a Tuesday morning. Coulter was in the barn when he heard the glass shatter. He dropped the bridle he'd been mending and ran toward the house, boots slipping on the frozen ground. By the time he reached the porch, Mara was already standing in the doorway, a jagged rock the size of a fist in her hand. "Anyone hurt?" Coulter asked, breathing hard. "No." Mara turned the stone over, examining it. Samuel's still asleep. Didn't hear it. Coulter looked past her into the main room. Shattered glass glittered across the floor, and cold air poured through the broken window. He could see the curtain fluttering, the wood frame splintered where the rock had punched through. "Did you see who threw it?" "No, but they didn't stick around to find out if it landed." Coulter crossed the threshold and picked up a piece of glass, feeling the sharp edge bite into his thumb. A dark stain spread across the fragment. Blood, but not from the cut. He looked closer and realized someone had wrapped the rock in cloth, soaked in something rust-colored. "What is that?" Mara asked. Coulter held it up to the light. The smell hit him then. Metallic, rotten. "Animal blood. Pig, maybe." Mara's jaw tightened. "Sending a message." "Looks like it." She set the rock on the table and started sweeping up the glass, her movement sharp and efficient. Coulter went to the storage shed and pulled out a sheet of oiled canvas to cover the window until he could replace the pane. The whole time, neither of them spoke. There wasn't much to say. They both knew what this meant. The town had stopped whispering and started acting. By the time Coulter finished nailing the canvas into place, his hands were numb and his breath came out in clouds. He stepped back to check the seal, then turned to find Mara standing behind him with 2 cups of coffee. "Here," she said, handing him one. He took it gratefully, wrapping his fingers around the warm ceramic. "Thanks." They stood on the porch together, looking out at the trail that wound down toward the valley. From up here, the town was just a smudge of smoke and distant rooftops, barely visible through the trees. "You ever think about leaving?" Coulter asked. Mara sipped her coffee. "Where would I go?" "Somewhere else. Somewhere they don't know you." "They'd know me soon enough. People always do." She looked at him sideways. "You asking me to leave?" "No, just wondering if you wanted to." "I don't." "Even with this?" "Especially with this." Mara set her cup on the porch railing. "I've been running from small-minded people my whole life. I'm tired of it. Running and staying are 2 different things." "So are surviving and living." Coulter studied her profile, the hard line of her jaw, the way she held herself like she was braced for the next blow. He wondered how many times she'd stood her ground like this, how many times she'd been forced to move on anyway. "I won't let them drive you off," he said. Mara turned to face him fully. "You can't stop them." "I can try." "And when they come for you instead?" "Then they come for me." She searched his face, looking for cracks, for doubt. When she didn't find any, something in her expression shifted, not quite softening, but easing, like a fist unclenching. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. "Maybe, but I'll regret doing nothing more." Mara picked up her coffee again and drained the rest in one long swallow. "Then we'd better get ready." Inside, Samuel was awake and sitting at the kitchen table staring at the broken window. He looked older in the morning light, his hair thinner, his skin loose around his neck, but there was color in his cheeks now, strength in the way he held his shoulders. "What happened?" he asked. "Someone threw a rock," Coulter said, keeping his voice even. "Through the window." "Yes." Samuel's gaze moved to Mara, then back to his son. "Because of her." "Because people are scared of what they don't understand." "Scared?" Samuel's mouth twisted. "That what we're calling it?" "What would you call it?" "Cruelty." The old man pushed himself to his feet, slower than he used to, but without help. He walked to the canvas-covered window and ran his hand along the frame. "This is my fault." "No, it's not," Mara said from the doorway. "I'm the reason you're here. The reason they're angry." "They were angry before I showed up. I just gave them a target." Samuel turned to look at her. "Why do you stay?" "Because your son asked me to." "That's not reason enough." "It is for me." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Coulter watched his father struggle with something, pride maybe, or shame, before finally nodding. "Then you're family," Samuel said, "and family doesn't run." Mara blinked, caught off guard. For a moment, her carefully maintained walls flickered, and Coulter saw something raw beneath them. Then she straightened and nodded back. "No," she said, "they don't." The rest of the morning passed in tense quiet. Coulter spent it reinforcing the other windows, checking the doors, making sure there were no easy ways for someone to cause trouble without being seen. Mara worked alongside him, hammering boards into place, her face set in grim determination. By noon, the house looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Samuel watched from the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea Mara had forced on him. He didn't complain, didn't offer advice, just sat there, breathing slowly, getting stronger with every passing day. When Coulter came back inside for lunch, he found Mara standing at the stove, stirring a pot of stew. She didn't turn around when he entered. "We're running low on flour," she said, "and salt. You'll need to go into town soon." Coulter hung his coat on the hook by the door. "I can wait a few more days?" "No, you can't. We'll run out." "Then I'll make it stretch." "Coulter." She turned to face him, ladle in hand. "You can't avoid them forever." "I'm not avoiding them. I'm giving them time to calm down. They're not going to calm down. They're going to get worse. Mara set the ladle down and crossed her arms. You need to go into town. Buy what we need. Show them you're not scared. I'm not scared. Then prove it. He wanted to argue, but she was right. Hiding up here would only make things worse. If he stayed away, the rumors would grow teeth. People would say he was ashamed, that he knew what he was doing was wrong. Fine, he said. I'll go tomorrow. Good. She went back to stirring the stew, and Coulter sat down across from his father. She's tough, Samuel said quietly. Yeah. Tougher than you. I know. Samuel smiled, just barely, but it was there. Smart woman. The smartest. They ate in silence, the stew warming them from the inside out. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the canvas over the broken window. Snow was coming. Coulter could feel it in the air, that particular kind of cold that settled into your bones and wouldn't leave. He hoped the town would stay home when it hit, but he doubted it. The next morning, Coulter saddled his horse before dawn and rode down the mountain alone. The trail was slick with ice, and the horse picked its way carefully, ears swiveling at every sound. By the time they reached the valley floor, the sun was just starting to crest the ridgeline, painting the snow orange and gold. The town looked the same as it always had. Low buildings clustered around a main street, smoke rising from chimneys, a few early risers moving between the shops. But something felt different, colder, like the whole place was holding its breath. Coulter tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside. The warmth hit him first, then the smell, coffee, tobacco, sawdust. 3 men stood near the counter, talking in low voices. They stopped when they saw him. Morning, Coulter said. No one answered. He walked to the counter where the store owner, a squat man named Mercer with thinning hair and a permanent scowl, was stacking cans of beans. Need to place an order, Coulter said. Mercer didn't look up. We're closed. Sign says you're open. Sign's wrong. Coulter glanced back at the 3 men, who were watching him now with open hostility. One of them, a farmer named Dutch, with a face like weathered leather, spat into a tin can. You got a problem, Dutch? Coulter asked. Yeah, I got a problem. You bring shame on this town, then walk in here like nothing's wrong. I haven't brought shame on anyone. That woman you're keeping up there says different. Mara's a healer. She saved my father's life. Dutch stepped forward. That what you call it? Saving? What would you call it? Living in sin, breaking every rule we got. He jerked his chin toward Mercer. We don't want your business here, not anymore. Coulter's hands curled into fists. I've been coming to this store for 10 years. Then it's 10 years too long. Mercer finally looked up, his expression carefully neutral. Maybe you should go, Hale. I came here to buy supplies. And I'm telling you we don't have any, not for you. That's a lie. It's the truth as of right now. Mercer leaned on the counter. You want to keep pretending everything's fine, that's your choice, but don't expect us to pretend with you. Coulter stared at him, anger boiling up hot and fast. He wanted to grab Mercer by the collar, to demand he sell him the flour and salt, to force the town to treat him like they used to, but he knew it wouldn't work. Violence would only prove them right. So instead, he turned and walked out. Behind him, Dutch called after him. Tell that woman she's not welcome here either. You understand me, Hale? She shows her face in this town. We'll run her out ourselves. Coulter didn't answer. He untied his horse and mounted up, his hands shaking with rage. When he got back to the mountain, Mara was waiting on the porch. She took one look at his face and said, They wouldn't sell to you. No. What did they say? Coulter dismounted and looped the reins over the hitching post. That we're living in sin, that you're not welcome, that if you come into town, they'll run you out. Mara's expression didn't change. Expected. I should have hit him. No, you shouldn't have. He deserved it. Maybe. But it wouldn't have helped. She stepped down from the porch and took the horse's reins. We'll find another way to get supplies. How? They've cut us off. There are other towns, other stores. The nearest one's 2 days' ride. Then we make it work. Coulter wanted to argue, but the exhaustion hit him all at once. Months of it, years of it, all crashing down like a rock slide. He sat down on the porch steps and put his head in his hands. Mara stood there for a moment, then sat down beside him, not touching, just close enough that he could feel her presence. "You don't have to keep fighting for me," she said. "Yes, I do." "Why?" He looked at her, this woman who'd saved his father, who'd stood her ground against a town full of hatred, who'd never once asked for anything in return. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. Mara stared out at the trees, her jaw working. "The right thing doesn't always win." "No, but it's still worth doing." She didn't answer, just sat there beside him, solid and unshakable, while the wind howled through the pines. That night, the second attack came. Coulter woke to the smell of smoke. He bolted upright, heart hammering, and stumbled to the window. Orange light flickered outside. Fire, spreading fast across the woodpile stacked against the north wall. "Fire!" he shouted, grabbing his boots. Mara was already up, pulling on her coat. Samuel appeared in the doorway, moving faster than Coulter had seen him move in months. "What do we do?" the old man asked. "Get water," Coulter said, yanking open the door. "Everything you can carry." They ran outside into the freezing night. The fire had caught on the dry wood and was climbing fast, flames licking up the side of the house. Smoke poured into the air, thick and choking. Coulter grabbed a bucket from the porch and ran to the well. Mara was right behind him, hauling up water and passing it to Samuel, who carried it to the fire. They worked in frantic silence, bucket after bucket, throwing water onto the flames. It took 20 minutes to get it under control. By the time the last ember died, Coulter's arms were shaking and his lungs burned from the smoke. He dropped the bucket and leaned against the side of the house, gasping. Mara stood nearby, soot-streaked and breathing hard. "They're escalating." "Yeah. Next time it might not be the woodpile." "I know." Samuel came around the corner, moving slower now, his face pale. "We need to leave." "No," Coulter said. "Son, this is getting dangerous." "I don't care. They're going to kill us. Then they'll have to do it while we're still standing." Samuel looked at Mara as if hoping she'd be the voice of reason, but she just shook her head. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Neither am I," Coulter added. The old man stood there for a long moment, staring at the two of them, these stubborn, impossible people who refused to bend. Then he sighed. "All right," he said. "Then we stay. But we do it smart, no more sleeping through the night. We keep watch. We stay ready." Coulter nodded. Agreed. They spent the rest of the night taking shifts, one person awake at all times, watching the trail for movement. But no one came. The fire had been enough for one night. When dawn finally broke, pale and cold, Coulter walked the perimeter of the property, checking for signs of who'd set the fire. He found boot prints in the snow near the woodpile. 2 sets, maybe 3. But they disappeared into the trees before he could track them far. Whoever had done this knew the mountain, knew the trails, knew how to move without being seen. Coulter stood there at the edge of the tree line, staring down at the valley, and made a decision. He was done waiting for the town to come to its senses. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one. That afternoon, he rode back down the mountain. This time, he didn't stop at the general store. He rode straight to the church, where Reverend Cass was standing outside talking to a group of women. Coulter dismounted and walked up to them. "Reverend," he said, "we need to talk." Cass's smile was thin and cold. "I'm afraid I'm busy at the moment." "Make time." One of the women, a severe-looking matron named Ethel Pruitt, stepped forward. "You have no business interrupting the Reverend Mr. Hale." "I have every business. Someone tried to burn down my house last night." The group went quiet. Cass's expression didn't change. "That's terrible," the Reverend said. "Do you know who did it?" "I have my suspicions. I'm sure the sheriff would be interested in hearing them." "The sheriff's part of the problem." Cass tilted his head. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. You all decided I was guilty, and now you're trying to run me off my own land." "No one's trying to run you off, Mr. Hale. We're simply concerned about the moral character of—" "Spare me." Coulter stepped closer. "You don't care about morality. You care about control, about making sure everyone fits into your narrow idea of what's right." "Well, I don't fit, and neither does Mara. And we're not leaving." Ethel's face flushed red. "You're a disgrace." "Maybe, but I'm a disgrace who's still standing." Cass raised a hand, silencing her. Mr. Hale, I understand you're upset, but threatening us won't solve anything. I'm not threatening you, I'm warning you. If anyone comes near my property again, I'll defend it. With force, if necessary. That sounds like a threat to me. Call it whatever you want. Coulter turned to go, then stopped. One more thing. Mara Vance saved my father's life. She's done nothing wrong. If you've got a problem with her, it's because you're too small-minded to see her value. That's on you, not her. He mounted his horse and rode off before anyone could respond. The reaction was immediate. By nightfall, the whole town was buzzing. Stories spread like wildfire. Coulter Hale had threatened the Reverend, had defended his immoral arrangement, had declared war on the community. The details shifted and grew with each retelling, until by the next morning, some people were saying he'd pulled a gun. Coulter heard about it from Iris, who came up the trail the following afternoon with a basket of supplies. You stirred the hornet's nest, she said, setting the basket on the kitchen table. They started it. Doesn't matter who started it. Matters who finishes it. Iris looked around the house, taking in the boarded windows, the soot stains on the wall. They really tried to burn you out? They did. And you're still here. We're still here. Iris nodded slowly. Good. But you need to be smart about this, Coulter. The town's divided right now. Some folks think you're a fool. Others think you're brave. If you push too hard, you'll lose the ones who might have sided with you. I don't care about sides. You should, because if the whole town turns against you, you won't survive the winter. Mara appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. What do you suggest? Lay low. Stop making speeches. Let them cool off. They set fire to our house. I know, and they were wrong, but reacting won't stop them. It'll make them worse. Iris pulled a folded letter from her coat. I brought this. It's from a man in Leadville. Doctor I know. He's got a clinic, needs help. If things get too bad here, you could go there. Mara took the letter, but didn't open it. I'm not leaving. Even if they kill you? Even then. Iris looked at Coulter. She always this stubborn? Always. The old woman sighed. Then I'll pray you both survive what's coming. She left before the sun set, and Coulter watched her disappear down the trail, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like snow. That night, they didn't sleep. They sat in the main room, a fire burning low in the stove, and waited. Samuel dozed in his chair. Mara sharpened a knife. Coulter cleaned his rifle. Around midnight, they heard voices on the trail. Coulter stood and moved to the window, pulling back the canvas just enough to see. Torches. 6 of them. Maybe more. Moving up the mountain in a loose group. They're coming, he said. Mara was already at his side, looking out. How many? At least 6. Armed? Can't tell. Samuel woke with a start. What's happening? Stay inside, Coulter told him. No matter what. He grabbed the rifle and stepped out onto the porch. Mara followed, the knife tucked into her belt. The torches stopped about 50 yards out, just beyond the tree line. Coulter could make out faces now. Dutch, the farmer. Mercer from the store. A few others he recognized. And at the front, holding a torch high, was Sheriff Garth Coleman. Coleman was a big man, barrel-chested and broad-shouldered, with a mustache that drooped past his chin. He'd been sheriff for 15 years, and in that time, he'd kept the peace through a combination of intimidation and selective enforcement. Now he stood at the edge of Coulter's property, torch in one hand, shotgun in the other. Coulter Hales, he called out. We need to talk. Coulter raised the rifle, resting it across his forearm. Then talk. Not with a gun pointed at me. You're on my land with a mob. I'll point whatever I want. Coleman's jaw tightened. We're here on official business. What business? The business of maintaining order. You've been causing trouble, Hale. Threatening the Reverend, harboring a woman of questionable morals. The town council's decided it's time to intervene. Intervene how? Send the woman away. Let things settle down. No. That's not a request. Coulter's finger moved to the trigger. Then it's a waste of breath. Behind Coleman, the men shifted, muttering. Dutch took a step forward, but the sheriff held up a hand. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Coleman said. You're making it necessary. I'm trying to keep you alive, you damned fool. If you don't send her away, the council's going to take action. Legal action. On what grounds? Moral corruption, endangering the community. Take your pick. Mara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the night. I'm not leaving. Coleman's gaze shifted to her. Miss Vance, this doesn't concern you. It concerns me completely. You've caused enough trouble. Time to move on. No. The sheriff's face darkened. Then you'll be arrested, both of you. On what charge? Coulter demanded. Resisting lawful orders, disturbing the peace. I'll think of something. You can't arrest us for living on our own land. Watch me. Coleman took a step forward, and Coulter raised the rifle to his shoulder. That's far enough. The sheriff stopped. The men behind him tensed, hands moving toward their own weapons. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. The wind howled through the pines, the torches flickered, and Coulter stood on his porch, rifle aimed at the sheriff's chest, knowing that if he pulled the trigger, everything would end. Then Samuel's voice came from behind him, rough and strong. Put the gun down, son. Coulter didn't move. Dad, put it down. Slowly, Coulter lowered the rifle. Samuel stepped out onto the porch, moving carefully but without hesitation. He looked older in the torchlight, thinner, frailer, but there was steel in his eyes. Sheriff, he said, you know me. I do, Samuel. You know I'm not a liar. Never said you were. Then listen, that woman standing beside my son saved my life. I was dying. The doctors gave up on me. She didn't. Samuel's voice cracked just slightly. She worked day and night, fought for me when no one else would, and now you want to punish her for it. Coleman's expression softened, just a fraction. Samuel, I understand. No, you don't. You're standing here with a mob, threatening the only people who cared enough to keep me alive. And you call that order? Samuel shook his head. That's cowardice. The silence that followed was absolute. Then slowly Coleman lowered his shotgun. I'm sorry, Samuel, he said quietly. But the council's made its decision. Then the council's wrong. Maybe. But it's not my call to make. He turned and walked back toward the tree line. The other men followed, torches bobbing in the darkness. Within minutes, they were gone. Coulter stood on the porch, still holding the rifle, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Mara put a hand on his shoulder. It's not over. I know. They'll be back. I know. Samuel sank into the chair behind them, suddenly exhausted. We can't keep doing this. We don't have a choice, Coulter said. There's always a choice. Not one I'm willing to make. The old man looked up at him, eyes tired but proud. Then we fight. Yeah, Coulter said, we fight. And somewhere down in the valley, the town prepared for war. The war came slowly, then all at once. For 3 days after the confrontation, nothing happened. No rocks through windows, no fires, no mobs with torches. The mountain sat in eerie silence, and that silence was worse than the violence had been. Coulter found himself jumping at shadows, his hand never far from the rifle. Mara moved through the house like a soldier on patrol, checking locks, testing boards, her face set in permanent watchfulness. Samuel grew stronger each day, but the tension wore on him. Coulter could see it in the way his father's hands trembled when he thought no one was looking, in the way he'd pause mid-sentence and stare out the window at nothing. On the 4th day, Iris came back up the trail. This time, she didn't bring supplies. She brought a warning. Town council's meeting tonight, she said, standing on the porch with her arms folded against the cold. They're voting on something. Wouldn't tell me what, but I heard enough whispers to know it's about you. What kind of vote? Coulter asked. The kind that makes things official. Legal. Iris's face was grim. They're going to try to force you out, Coulter, one way or another. Let them try. This isn't a joke. They've got the law on their side now. Sheriff Coleman might not like it, but he'll do what the council tells him. And if they order him to arrest you, then he'll have to shoot me first. Iris shook her head. You're as stubborn as your father was at your age. Just as stupid, too. Dad's right here, Samuel called from inside. And I can hear you. Despite everything, Iris smiled. She stepped past Coulter and went to the kitchen, where Samuel was sitting with a cup of tea. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. You look better, she said. Feel better.
Thanks to her. Samuel nodded toward Mara, who was working at the stove. Never thought I'd see another spring. Now I'm thinking about summer. That's good. That's real good.
Iris leaned forward, lowering her voice. But you need to convince your son to be smart about this. He's going to get himself killed. I've tried. He won't listen. Then make him listen. Samuel met her eyes. Would you, if you were in his place? Iris opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. After a moment, she sighed. No, I wouldn't. Then don't ask him to do what you couldn't. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the wind outside. Finally, Iris stood. I'll do what I can, she said. But my voice doesn't carry much weight with the council. They stopped listening to me years ago. Why? Mara asked, turning from the stove. Because I'm too old, too opinionated, and I don't go to church. Iris pulled her coat tighter. Same reasons they don't like you, girl. We don't fit their mold. Then maybe their mold's the problem. Maybe. But that doesn't make it easier to break.
Iris left before sunset, and the house fell back into its waiting silence. Coulter spent the evening reinforcing the doors, adding extra bars across the frame. Mara sharpened every blade in the house. Samuel cleaned his old revolver, the one he'd carried during his logging days, checking the chambers with practiced hands. You remember how to use that? Coulter asked. Muscle memory, Samuel said. Some things you don't forget. That night they took shifts again. Coulter took the first watch, sitting in the chair by the window with the rifle across his lap. The moon was nearly full, turning the snow blue-white and casting long shadows through the trees. Every branch that moved looked like a person. Every sound was a footstep. Around midnight, Mara came to relieve him. Anything? She asked. Nothing. You should sleep. So should you. Coulter handed her the rifle and stretched, his back cracking. Wake me if anything happens. I will. He started toward his room, then stopped. Mara. Yeah? Thank you. For staying. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Where else would I go? It wasn't an answer, not really, but it was enough. Coulter slept badly, dreams full of fire and shouting. When he woke a few hours later, gray dawn was seeping through the canvas-covered windows. He found Mara still at her post, dark circles under her eyes. You didn't wake me, he said. Didn't need to. Mara, I'm fine. She wasn't fine. None of them were, but Coulter didn't push it. Instead, he made coffee while Samuel got up and started moving through his morning routine. Slower than before his illness, but steady. Stronger. They were halfway through breakfast when the knock came. All three of them froze. Coulter's hand went to the rifle leaning against the wall. Mara stood, the knife from her belt already in her hand. Samuel just stared at the door. The knock came again, louder this time. Coulter Hale. It was a woman's voice, unfamiliar. I need to talk to you. Coulter moved to the door, rifle ready. Who are you? My name's Margaret Finch. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need 5 minutes. Why? Because my daughter's dying, and I heard you've got a healer up here who can help. Coulter exchanged a glance with Mara. She nodded slowly. He opened the door. The woman standing on the porch was thin and worn-looking, maybe 40 years old but carrying the weight of 50. Her dress was patched and faded, her hands red and chapped from work, but her eyes were desperate. Please, she said. I know what they're saying about you. I know the council voted to... She stopped, swallowing hard. I don't care about any of that. My daughter's got fever. She's been sick for 2 weeks and nothing's working. The doctor says there's nothing more he can do. Mara stepped forward. What are her symptoms? High fever. She can't keep food down. Coughs until she can't breathe. Her skin's burning, but she says she's cold. Sounds like pneumonia. That's what the doctor said. Said all we can do is wait and see if she pulls through. Margaret's voice cracked. But she's only 7. I can't just wait and watch her die. Mara looked at Coulter. He could see the conflict in her face, the desire to help warring with the knowledge that going into town was dangerous, that helping this woman might bring the full weight of the council's anger down on them.
but he also saw the moment she made her decision. "I'll come," Mara said. "You can't," Coulter said immediately. "They'll arrest you." "Then they'll have to do it while I'm saving a child's life." "Mara, I'm going, Coulter, with or without you." He wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the house and refuse to let her leave, but he knew her well enough by now to know it wouldn't work. Once Mara set her mind to something, nothing could stop her. "Then I'm coming with you," he said. "So am I," Samuel added. Mara shook her head. "You're staying here. You're not strong enough yet for this kind of trouble." "I'm strong enough to stand beside my family." "Samuel, don't argue with me, girl. You won't win." For a moment, something like affection flickered across Mara's face. Then she nodded. "Fine. But if shooting starts, you get behind something solid." "I've been in worse fights than this." "I doubt that." They gathered their things quickly. Mara's bag of medicines, clean cloth for bandages, the rifle, Samuel's revolver. Margaret watched from the doorway, hope and fear warring on her face. "The council doesn't know I came here," she said as they prepared to leave. "I snuck out before dawn. If they find out, they won't hear it from us," Coulter said. They followed Margaret down the mountain, moving as fast as Samuel could manage. The old man breathed hard but kept pace, his jaw set in determination. Halfway down, they met a group of 3 men coming up the trail. Townspeople Coulter recognized but didn't know well. The men stopped when they saw Mara. "What's she doing here?" one of them asked Margaret. "She's helping my daughter." "Council said she's not allowed in town." "I don't care what the council said." The man stepped forward, blocking the trail. "Margaret, you know the rules." "My daughter's dying," Margaret snapped. "Your rules can go to hell." The man's face hardened. He looked at Coulter. "This is a mistake, Hale. You bring her into town, there's going to be trouble." "There's already trouble," Coulter said. "We're just walking through it." He pushed past the man, and after a moment's hesitation, the others let them through. But Coulter could feel their eyes following as they continued down the trail. By the time they reached the edge of town, word had spread. People stood in doorways, watching. A few shouted things, words Coulter didn't want to catch. Margaret led them quickly through the side streets, avoiding the main road, until they reached a small house at the far edge of town. Inside, the heat was stifling. A fire burned too hot in the stove, and the windows were shut tight. The air smelled of sickness, sweat, and medicine, and something deeper, darker. A little girl lay in a bed pushed against the far wall. She was small and pale, her breathing labored. Sweat matted her hair to her forehead. Her eyes were half open but unfocused. Mara went to her immediately, dropping her bag and pressing a hand to the girl's forehead. "How long's she been like this?" 3 days, Margaret said. "She was better at first, but then she got worse." Mara pulled back the blankets and listened to the girl's chest, her face growing more serious. "Her lungs are full of fluid. We need to break the fever and clear her breathing." "Can you do it?" "I can try." For the next 2 hours, Mara worked. She mixed tinctures, made the girl drink bitter teas, applied hot compresses to her chest. She propped her up to help her breathe, massaged her back to loosen the congestion. Margaret assisted, following every instruction without question. Coulter and Samuel stood guard at the door, watching the street. More people had gathered outside, not an angry mob, not yet, but a crowd. Curious, hostile, waiting. "They're going to try something," Samuel said quietly. "I know." "What do we do?" "Whatever we have to." Inside, the girl started coughing, deep, rattling coughs that sounded like they were tearing her apart. But then she coughed up thick phlegm, and her breathing eased slightly. "That's good," Mara said. "That's what we need. Her body's fighting back." An hour later, the fever broke. The girl's skin cooled. Her breathing steadied. Color started returning to her cheeks. Margaret knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down her face. "She's going to be all right?" "She needs rest. Lots of water. Keep her warm, but not too warm." Mara stood, wiping her hands. "But yes, she'll recover." Margaret grabbed Mara's hand and held it tight. "Thank you. Thank you." Mara pulled away gently. "Just doing what I know how to do." They stayed another 30 minutes, making sure the girl was stable. Then Mara packed her things and they prepared to leave. But when Coulter opened the door, Sheriff Coleman was standing on the street with 6 deputies. Miss Vance, the sheriff said, you're under arrest. Mara stepped out onto the porch. On what charge? Defying a lawful order of the town council, disturbing the peace, take your pick. I saved a child's life. That may be. But you did it against council orders. Coleman gestured to his deputies. Come along peacefully, and this doesn't have to get ugly. She's not going anywhere, Coulter said, stepping forward with the rifle. The deputies drew their weapons. Coleman held up a hand, stopping them. Put the gun down, Hale. Don't make this worse than it already is. You're arresting her for helping someone. How could it be worse? You pull that trigger, you're not just fighting me, you're fighting the law. You'll hang for it. Maybe. But you'll be dead first. They stood there, frozen in the moment, weapons drawn, neither side willing to back down. The crowd around them grew larger. Some people shouted for the sheriff to arrest them all. Others yelled for Coleman to leave them alone. Then a voice cut through the chaos. Sheriff, wait! Everyone turned. Dr. Henry Marsh was pushing through the crowd, his medical bag in hand. He was an older man, gray-haired and respected, someone even the council listened to. Doctor, Coleman said, this doesn't concern you. It does if you're arresting someone for practicing medicine. Marsh stepped forward and looked into Margaret's house. The little girl was sitting up now, drinking water, her mother beside her. The child was dying this morning. I told Margaret there was nothing more I could do, but she's alive now, breathing clear. Doctor, the council doesn't dictate medical practice. I do. Marsh turned to face Coleman directly. If you arrest this woman for saving a life, you set a precedent that no healer in this town can work without council approval. That's not law. That's tyranny. Coleman's jaw worked. Behind him, some of the deputies lowered their weapons. The council gave me an order, the sheriff said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Then tell the council they gave you a bad one. Marsh looked at Mara. What you did here today was good medicine, better than anything I could have managed. If the council has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. The silence stretched out. Coulter's finger stayed on the trigger, waiting. Samuel stood beside him, revolver ready. Finally, Coleman holstered his weapon. Get out of town, he said to Mara, before I change my mind. They didn't wait for him to reconsider. Coulter and Samuel backed toward the trail, weapons still drawn, while Mara walked ahead. The crowd parted slowly, reluctantly. Some people spat in the dirt as they passed. Others just stared. But as they reached the edge of town, Coulter heard a voice call out, "Thank you." He turned and saw Margaret standing in her doorway, her daughter beside her, small hand clutched in her mother's. Other voices joined in, not many, just a few, but enough to hear. "You did good. Thank you for helping. Don't listen to them." The words followed them up the trail, and for the first time in weeks, Coulter felt something other than anger, something almost like hope. By the time they reached the house, the sun was setting. Samuel collapsed into a chair the moment they got inside, exhausted. Mara started making tea, her hands steady despite everything that had happened. Coulter stood at the window, looking down at the valley. The town was just a collection of lights now, scattered and distant. "That was too close," Samuel said. "Yeah. They could have killed us. But they didn't. Only because of the doctor." Samuel took the tea Mara handed him. "We can't keep counting on luck." "It wasn't luck," Mara said. "It was people seeing the truth." "Some people. Not enough." "It's a start." Samuel didn't argue, just sipped his tea and stared into the fire. That night, Coulter couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. Around 2 a.m, Mara came out and sat beside him. "You did good today," she said. "So did you." "That girl would have died without help." "I know. But it doesn't change anything. The council still wants me gone. The town still thinks we're—" She paused, searching for words. "Wrong." "Some of them do. Not all. Enough of them." Coulter looked at her. In the moonlight, she looked tired, worn down, but not broken, never broken. "Why do you stay?" he asked. "Really? You could leave tonight and no one would blame you." Mara was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost inaudible. "Because I've spent my whole life being told I don't belong, that I'm too much, too loud, too hard. That no one wants someone like me. She turned to face him. But you did. You and Samuel. You didn't care that I wasn't pretty or soft or easy. You just needed someone who could do the work. And that's all I've ever wanted, to be valued for what I can do, not what I look like or how I make people feel. You're valued here. I know. She smiled just slightly. That's why I stay. They sat together in the cold, two people who didn't fit, who'd found themselves standing against the world together. And down in the valley, something shifted. Slowly, imperceptibly, but it shifted. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more people came up the mountain asking for Mara's help. First was a young woman with an infected wound on her hand, swollen and red, that the town doctor had wanted to amputate. Mara cleaned it, applied poultices, and saved the hand. Then an old man with a cough that wouldn't stop. Mara gave him teas and taught his daughter how to care for him. Within a week, he was breathing easier. Then a pregnant woman whose labor had stalled. Mara stayed with her for 18 hours straight, and when the baby finally came, healthy, screaming, the woman wept with gratitude. Word spread. Quietly at first, whispered between neighbors who needed help more than they cared about scandal. Then more openly, as people saw the results. Mara never charged for her services, just asked that people bring what they could, food, cloth, firewood. The house started filling with gifts left on the porch by people too nervous to knock. The council tried to stop it, issued warnings, threatened arrests. But Dr. Marsh stood firm, defending Mara's right to practice. And Sheriff Coleman, whether from exhaustion or changing conviction, stopped enforcing the council's orders. The town fractured. Some people refused to accept Mara, called her a witch, a whore, a devil. But others defended her, pointed to the lives she'd saved, asked what kind of community punished someone for healing. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was something. One afternoon in late December, Coulter was splitting wood when he heard horses coming up the trail. He grabbed the rifle, but when the riders came into view, he recognized Dr. Marsh and 2 women from town. He met them at the edge of the clearing. "Doctor." "Mr. Hale, is Miss Vance available?" "Why?" "Because the town council wants to make her an offer." Coulter's grip tightened on the rifle. "What kind of offer?" "The kind where everyone stops fighting." Marsh dismounted. "The council's willing to formally recognize her as a healer, give her permission to practice in town, even help her set up a clinic." "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for propriety. She'd have to live in town, not up here. Work during the day, go home at night. Follow the same rules as everyone else." Coulter's jaw clenched. They wanted to separate her from him and Samuel, to make her acceptable by isolating her from the people who'd stood beside her. "No," he said. "You should let her decide that." "She'll say no." "Then let her say it." Mara came out of the house, Samuel behind her. She looked at the visitors, then at Coulter. "What's going on?" Marsh explained the offer. As he talked, Mara's expression grew colder and colder. When he finished, she said, "No." "Miss Vance, this is a good offer. You'd have a proper practice, legitimate work. I have that here. You'd be part of the community again." "I'm part of a community, just not theirs." One of the women, Ethel Pruitt, the same one who'd condemned Mara weeks ago, stepped forward. "You're being foolish. This is your chance to redeem yourself." "I don't need redemption. I didn't do anything wrong. You're living with 2 men. I'm caring for a patient and working with people who respect me. If that's scandalous, then your scandal isn't worth worrying about." Ethel's face flushed. "You ungrateful—" "Enough," Marsh said. He looked at Mara with something like respect. "I tried. Council won't be happy, but I tried." "Tell them I appreciate the offer," Mara said, "and tell them I'm staying exactly where I am." The visitors left. Samuel laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. "That's my girl," he said. Mara looked at him, surprised. "Your girl?" "Well, you're family, aren't you? Family stands together." For the second time since Coulter had met her, Mara's carefully maintained armor cracked. Her eyes grew bright and she turned away quickly, but not before he saw her wipe at them. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Family stands together." That night, they celebrated. Nothing fancy. Just a decent meal, hot coffee, and the warmth of being inside while the wind howled outside. Samuel told stories from his logging days. Mara added a few of her own, tales of the strange injuries and stranger people she'd treated over the years. Coulter just listened, watching these two people who'd become his whole world, and felt something settle in his chest. They'd survived. Not just the mountain or the town, but everything that had tried to break them. And they were still standing. Winter deepened, and the mountain became a world unto itself. Snow fell in sheets, burying the trail under drifts taller than a man. The wind screamed through the pines day and night, shaking the house until the timbers groaned. For 3 weeks, no one came up from the valley. The isolation was complete, suffocating, and strangely peaceful. Samuel continued to improve. By January, he was doing most of his old work, feeding the animals, chopping wood, repairing equipment. His hands didn't shake anymore. His breathing came easy. Sometimes Coulter would catch him standing outside in the cold, just looking at the sky, and he knew his father was marveling at still being alive. Mara worked constantly. Even with no patients climbing the trail, she never stopped moving. She reorganized her medicines, prepared new tinctures, dried herbs from the summer stores. She taught Samuel exercises to keep his lungs strong. She showed Coulter how to identify infections before they turned deadly, how to set a broken bone, how to deliver a breech birth if it came to that. "Why are you teaching me this?" Coulter asked one afternoon while she walked him through stitching a wound on a practice leather hide. "Because if something happens to me, you need to know how to handle it." "Nothing's going to happen to you." "You don't know that." Her tone was matter of fact, not morbid, but it made Coulter's chest tighten anyway. The thought of losing her, after everything they'd fought for, everything they'd survived, felt impossible to consider. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said. Mara looked up from the leather. "That's not your choice to make." "Then whose choice is it?" "Mine. And I'm choosing to stay alive as long as I can." She went back to demonstrating the stitch pattern. "But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be prepared." They worked in silence for a while, Coulter's rough hands struggling to match her precise movements. Finally, she put her hand over his, guiding the needle. Like this, slow, even pressure. Her hand was warm and calloused, strong in a way that made him feel steadier. When she pulled away, he missed the contact immediately. "Better," she said, examining his work. "Keep practicing." That night, a storm rolled in that made the previous weeks look gentle. The wind hit the house like a physical thing, rattling windows and tearing at the roof. Snow came sideways, so thick Coulter couldn't see 10 feet beyond the porch. They brought extra wood inside and sealed every crack they could find, but the cold still crept in through gaps in the floorboards. Samuel sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets. "Haven't seen a storm like this in 20 years. "I remember that one," Coulter said. "Lost half the stock." "Lost more than that." 3 men died in the valley when their houses collapsed. Samuel stared into the flames. Whole town pulled together that year, shared food, rebuilt homes, people helping people. "What changed?" Mara asked from where she was brewing tea. "Time. Comfort. When things are easy, people forget how much they need each other." Samuel accepted the tea she handed him. Or maybe they just get selective about who deserves help. That's a depressing way to look at it. Doesn't make it wrong. The storm lasted 3 days. On the second night, part of the barn roof tore loose. Coulter and Mara fought through the wind to secure it, roping down canvas and nailing boards while snow pelted them like gravel. By the time they stumbled back inside, both were soaked and shaking. Samuel had hot water ready. They stripped off their frozen outer layers and huddled near the fire, teeth chattering. "That was stupid," Samuel said. "Could have waited until morning." "Stock would have frozen by morning," Coulter said. "Stock can be replaced." "Not easily." Easier than replacing either of you," Mara laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised all of them. "Listen to you, acting like you care." "I do care, you stubborn woman." "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." "Neither am I," Coulter added. Samuel looked between them, something unreadable crossing his face. "You two are going to be the death of me." "We brought you back from death once," Mara said. "We can do it again." "Let's not test that theory." When the storm finally broke, the world outside looked alien. Snow had reshaped everything. The trees were bent nearly double, the trail was gone completely, and the valley below had disappeared under a seamless white blanket. Coulter spent the morning digging out paths to the barn and woodshed. Samuel worked beside him, moving slower but steady. Mara cleared the porch and checked the animals, making sure none had suffered frostbite or injury. Around noon, they saw movement on the buried trail. Someone was coming up.
Coulter grabbed the rifle out of habit, but as the figure got closer, he recognized Iris's distinctive gait. She was hauling a sled behind her, loaded with supplies. "Don't just stand there," she called when she was close enough. "Help an old woman." They met her halfway and took the sled ropes. Iris looked exhausted, her face windburned and her breath coming hard. "You shouldn't have come up in this," Samuel said. "Probably not, but I figured you'd be running low on supplies, and I was right." She gestured to the sled. "Flour, salt, sugar, coffee, some dried meat, a few other things." "How much do we owe you?" Coulter asked. "Nothing. It's already paid for." "By who?" Iris smiled. "By people in town who wanted to help but were too scared to do it themselves. Margaret Finch organized it, said you saved her daughter's life and the least she could do was make sure you didn't starve." Mara stared at the sled, something working in her throat. "She didn't have to do that." "No, she didn't, but she wanted to, and she's not the only one." Iris pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat. "This is a list of 5 families who want to hire you, officially. They're willing to pay in cash or trade, whatever you prefer, and they don't care what the council says about it." Mara took the paper but didn't unfold it. "The council won't like this. The council can rot. They're losing their grip, Mara. Slowly, but they're losing it. People are starting to ask why they're so scared of a woman who heals people." Iris looked at Coulter. "And they're asking why a man who saved his father's life is being treated like a criminal." "What about the sheriff?" Samuel asked. Coleman's backed off. "Won't enforce the council's orders anymore. Says he's got better things to do than arrest healers." Iris shrugged. "He's not on your side exactly, but he's not against you either." They hauled the supplies inside and shared a meal. Iris stayed for a few hours, warming herself by the fire and catching them up on town gossip. The council was fracturing. 2 members had resigned and another was facing calls to step down. Reverend Cass was preaching harder than ever about morality and order, but his congregation was shrinking. Dr. Marsh had started openly collaborating with Mara, sending patients up the mountain when he couldn't help them. "Things are changing," Iris said as she prepared to leave. "Not fast, not easy, but changing." "Will it be enough?" Mara asked. "Enough for what?" "For us to stop fighting." Iris pulled on her coat. "I don't know. But I know this. You've already won the part that matters. You proved you belong. Now it's just a matter of making everyone else accept it." After she left, Coulter unfolded the list of families wanting Mara's help. He recognized most of the names: working people, farmers, and tradesmen, the kind who couldn't afford to care about scandal when their children were sick or their parents were dying. "You gonna take these?" he asked Mara. She was staring out the window at the snow-covered valley. "I want to, but every time I go down there, it's a risk." "So we make it less risky." "How?" Coulter thought for a moment. "We build something here, a place people can come to instead of you going down there. Set up a proper clinic on the mountain." Mara turned to look at him. "That's a lot of work." "So? And expensive." "I've got the money." "Coulter, I'm serious. We've got the land, we've got the timber. We build something real, something permanent, and we show them this isn't going away." He crossed to stand beside her. "You said you wanted to stop running, so let's stop. Let's plant roots so deep they can't pull us out." Mara studied his face, searching for doubt. When she didn't find any, she nodded slowly. "All right, we build." They started planning that night. Samuel sketched rough designs on paper, a separate building near the main house, large enough for patients to rest, with space for Mara's supplies and a proper work area. Nothing fancy, but solid, permanent. Over the next 2 weeks, they cleared a site and began cutting timber. The work was brutal in the cold, but they kept at it. Samuel handled the lighter tasks, measuring and planning. Mara helped haul logs. Coulter did the heavy cutting, swinging the axe until his shoulders burned and his hands blistered. Word spread. By the 3rd week, people started showing up to help. First came Margaret Finch's husband.
a carpenter who spent 3 days helping frame the walls. Then 2 brothers whose mother Mara had treated for dropsy arrived with a wagon full of milled lumber. Dr. Marsh sent supplies, bandages, tinctures, a proper examination table he'd been storing in his attic. The building took shape slowly. 4 walls, a roof, windows that actually opened, a door that hung straight. Inside they built shelves for medicines, a bed for patients who needed to stay overnight, a stove for heat. Mara organized everything with meticulous care, labeling jars and arranging instruments like she was building something sacred. By late February, it was finished. They stood outside on a clear, cold morning, looking at what they'd built. The clinic wasn't beautiful, the wood was rough, the roof slightly uneven, the windows mismatched, but it was real, solid, a declaration that they weren't leaving. "It's perfect," Mara said quietly. Samuel clapped Coulter on the shoulder. "You did good, son." We all did. That afternoon, the first official patient arrived. A young man named Thomas Webb with a gash across his forearm from a sawmill accident. The town doctor had stitched it, but infection had set in. The wound was red and swollen, oozing pus. Mara led him into this clinic and got to work. She cleaned the wound, removed the old stitches, drained the infection. Thomas gritted his teeth through it, sweat pouring down his face. "This is going to hurt," Mara warned before she started debriding the dead tissue. "Already hurts. It's going to hurt worse." She wasn't wrong. Thomas cursed through clenched teeth, but he held still while she worked. When she finished and rebandaged the arm with clean dressings, he looked pale but grateful. "How much do I owe you?" he asked. "Whatever you can afford." Thomas dug into his pocket and pulled out $3. "It's all I've got until payday." "That's fine." "Really? Really?" He stared at the money in her hand like he couldn't believe it. "The doctor charges $5 just for a visit." "I'm not the doctor." Thomas left with instructions to come back in 3 days. When Coulter asked Mara why she'd charged so little, she shrugged. "He's a working man. $3 probably hurt him worse than the wound did. I'm not going to bleed people dry just because I can." "You could charge more. People would pay it." "I know, but I don't need more. I need them to keep coming back, to trust that I won't rob them for help they deserve." It was simple logic, but it carried weight. Word spread faster after that. The healer on the mountain was good and fair. She didn't judge, didn't overcharge, didn't turn people away. More patients came. Some paid in cash. Others brought food, cloth, firewood, whatever they had to trade. A few couldn't pay at all, and Mara treated them anyway. The clinic became a hub. People would come for treatment and stay to talk, sharing news from the valley. Coulter learned about births and deaths, marriages and feuds, the small dramas that made up life in the town below. Some of the visitors were friendly, others were cautious, testing whether the mountain was safe. A few were openly hostile, there only because they had no other choice. Mara treated them all the same. Efficient, professional, fair. One evening in early March, a woman named Catherine Yates came up the trail. She was well-dressed, composed, the kind of woman who usually avoided scandal. Her presence alone was significant. "I need to speak with Miss Vance," she said when Coulter answered the door. "She's in the clinic." Catherine hesitated. "Is it proper for me to go there alone?" "It's a medical clinic, not a brothel." Her face flushed. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant. Clinic's the building on the right." He watched her walk over, then went back inside. Samuel was at the table, working on a piece of wood carving he'd taken up to keep his hands busy. "Who was that?" the old man asked. "Catherine Yates." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "The council member's wife?" "Yeah." "What's she doing here?" "I guess we'll find out." An hour later, Catherine left looking shaken but relieved. Mara came back to the house and poured herself tea without saying anything. "What did she want?" Coulter finally asked. "To know if she was pregnant." "Is she?" "Yes, about 3 months along." Mara stared into her cup. "She's terrified. Her husband's twice her age and not well. She thinks he'll die before the baby's born, and she doesn't know what she'll do." "What did you tell her?" "That she's strong, that she'll survive, that I'll help her when the time comes." Mara looked up. She cried. right there in the clinic, said that I was the first person who treated her like a person instead of a scandal waiting to happen. Her husband's on the council. I know. If he finds out she came here, he won't. Not from me. Coulter understood. This was bigger than one woman's visit. This was a crack in the wall the council had built. If Catherine Yates felt safe coming to Mara, others would follow. The people the council claimed to protect were starting to see through the lies. 2 weeks later, Reverend Cass came up the mountain. Coulter saw him from a distance and immediately went for the rifle. But the Reverend came alone, on foot, moving slowly, like a man who'd already made peace with whatever reception he'd get. "Mr. Hale," Cass said when he reached the house, "I'd like to speak with you. And with Miss Vance." "Why?" "Because I was wrong." The words hung in the cold air. Coulter stared at him, looking for the trap, the angle. But Cass just stood there, hands folded, face lined with exhaustion. "Wrong about what?" Coulter asked. "About her, about you, about what you're doing here." Cass gestured toward the clinic. "I convinced myself you were a threat to the community, that allowing this to continue would destroy the moral fabric of our town. But I was wrong." "What changed your mind?" "My daughter, she's been sick for a month, wasting away." The doctor couldn't help. "I prayed, but—" He stopped collecting himself. "My wife brought her here 3 days ago. I didn't know. She was afraid to tell me. But Miss Vance figured out what was wrong. A problem with her blood, something about not getting enough iron. She gave my wife instructions, and my daughter's already improving." Mara had appeared in the doorway of the clinic, listening. "Your wife paid," she said. "I remember her. She was scared. She thought I'd be angry." Cass's voice cracked. "And she was right to think so. I've been preaching against you for months, calling you immoral, pushing the council to drive you away, and all that time you were saving lives. I was doing my job." "Your job?" Cass laughed bitterly. "I told myself I was doing mine too, protecting the community, but I was just protecting my own sense of how things should be." He looked at Coulter. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know. I'm going to speak to the council. Tell them to leave you alone." "They won't listen to you," Coulter said. "Maybe not, but I have to try. It's the least I can do." He turned to leave, but Mara called after him. "Reverend, bring your daughter back in 2 weeks. I want to check her progress." Cass nodded, unable to speak, and walked back down the trail. Samuel had been watching from the window. When Cass was out of sight, he let out a low whistle. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Day's not over yet," Coulter said. "Council might just replace him with someone worse." "Maybe, but it's still progress." That night, Coulter couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak in the wind. Around midnight, he gave up and went to the kitchen. Mara was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of tea. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much in my head." He poured himself tea and sat across from her. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. Nothing. How fast things changed." She wrapped her hands around her cup. 6 months ago, they wanted me dead. Now they're asking for help. It's strange. Strange good or strange bad? Just strange. Like I spent so long preparing for the worst that I don't know what to do when things get better. Coulter understood. He'd felt the same way, always braced for the next attack, the next crisis. The peace felt fragile, temporary, like something that could shatter at any moment. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Any of it?" Mara thought for a long time before answering. "No. Even the hard parts, even the parts where I thought we'd lose." She looked at him across the table. "You gave me something I've never had before." "What's that?" "A place to stand, where I don't have to apologize for who I am." Something shifted in Coulter's chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. He'd spent months focused on survival, on protecting his father and Mara from the town's hatred. But somewhere along the way, it had become more than that. She'd become more than that. "You never have to apologize," he said. "Not here. Not with us." Mara's eyes held his. "I know. That's why I'm staying." The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Then Samuel's voice came from his room, calling for water. The spell broke. Mara stood quickly. I'll get it. She disappeared down the hall, and Coulter sat alone in the kitchen, wondering when exactly his life had become so completely bound to hers. Spring came late that year. The snow lingered through March and into April, melting slowly under weak sunshine. But when the thaw finally arrived, it came fast. The creek swelled to twice its size. Mud turned the trail into a treacherous mess, and people came up the mountain in droves. The clinic was never empty. Mara worked from dawn until long after dark, treating everything from birthing complications to broken bones to mysterious illnesses no one else could diagnose. Coulter helped when he could, learning more medicine than he'd ever intended to know. Samuel managed the logistics, scheduling patients, organizing supplies, making sure Mara remembered to eat and sleep. They functioned like a single organism, each part supporting the others. By May, the town council had officially recognized Mara's practice. It wasn't an apology, wasn't acceptance, just a grudging acknowledgement that she wasn't going away and fighting her was costing more than tolerating her. Dr. Marsh came up to celebrate. He brought a bottle of whiskey and a sense of victory. "You did it," he said, raising his glass. "You beat them." "We didn't beat anyone," Mara said. "We just outlasted them." "Same thing." "No, it's not. They still don't like me. Still think what we're doing here is wrong. They just don't have the energy to fight anymore." "Then we'll take what we can get." Marsh drained his glass. "Sometimes survival is the victory." They drank together on the porch, watching the sun set over the valley. The town below looked peaceful from up here, lights twinkling, smoke rising from chimneys. Almost beautiful if you didn't know what it had taken to reach this moment. "What now?" Samuel asked. "Now we live," Coulter said. "Just live?" "Just live." And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. Living turned out to be harder than fighting. The months after the council's recognition should have felt like victory, but instead they felt like waiting. Coulter caught himself checking the trail at odd hours, expecting trouble that never came. Samuel slept with his revolver within reach, even though no one had threatened them in weeks. And Mara worked herself to exhaustion, as if stopping meant giving the town a chance to change its mind. It was Iris who finally called them out on it. She came up one afternoon in early June and found all three of them tense and jumpy. When Coulter nearly drew his rifle on her, she planted her hands on her hips and glared. "What in hell is wrong with you people?" "Nothing," Coulter said, lowering the weapon. "That's a lie. You're acting like the house is about to burn down." She looked at each of them in turn. "The fight's over. You won. Now you've got to figure out how to live with that." "We're living," Mara said from the clinic doorway. "No, you're surviving. There's a difference." Iris walked to the porch and sat heavily. "I've seen this before. People who spend so long in crisis that they don't know how to exist without it. They keep waiting for the next disaster, and when it doesn't come, they find ways to create it themselves." "We're not creating disasters," Samuel said. "Maybe not on purpose, but you're not letting yourselves rest either." Iris pulled out her pipe and lit it. "The town's accepted you. Not everyone, not completely, but enough. You can stop fighting now." "Just like that?" Coulter asked. "Just like that." "What if it falls apart again?" "Then you deal with it when it happens. But you can't spend your whole life preparing for the worst. Sometimes you have to trust that things might actually be all right." The words settled over them like snow. Coulter wanted to argue, but he couldn't find solid ground. Iris was right. They were still living like they were under siege, even though the siege had ended. After she left, Samuel was the first to speak. "Maybe we should listen to her." "About what?" Coulter asked. "About living. Actually living." The old man stood and stretched, his joints popping. "I'm tired of being scared, tired of waiting for the next attack. I want to enjoy the time I've got left." "You're not dying," Mara said. "Not today, but I will eventually, and I'd rather spend my remaining years doing something other than standing guard." Samuel looked at his son. "We built something good here. Maybe it's time we let ourselves appreciate it." Coulter wanted to protest, but when he looked around at the house they'd fortified, the clinic they'd built, the life they'd carved out of hostility and stone, he realized his father was right. They'd won. The problem was none of them knew what winning was supposed to feel like. That night, Coulter made a decision. He took down the boards from the windows, removed the extra bars from the doors, put the rifle back in the storage shed instead of keeping it by the front entrance. Each action felt dangerous, like exposing himself to attack. But he did it anyway. When Mara saw what he'd done, she didn't say anything. She just started taking down her own defenses. The knife she kept in her boot, the second exit she'd planned from the clinic, the emergency supplies hidden in 3 different locations. They were learning to live without armor. Summer came in full force, turning the mountain green and wild. The clinic stayed busy, but the work developed a rhythm. Patients came with predictable problems. Summer ailments, work injuries, pregnancies. Nothing that required the desperate intensity of the winter months. Mara hired help, a young woman named Ruth from the valley who wanted to learn healing. Ruth was quiet and competent, quick to learn and unafraid of blood. With her assistance, Mara could finally take breaks, could sleep full nights, could sit on the porch in the evening without feeling guilty about resting. "She's good," Samuel observed one afternoon while watching Ruth change a wound dressing. "She is," Mara agreed. "You thinking of taking on more students?" "Maybe, if the right people come along. You could build something bigger than just a clinic, a real school for healers." Mara looked at him sharply. "That's ambitious." "So? You've already done the impossible. Why stop now?" The idea took root. Over the next few weeks, Mara started teaching Ruth not just tasks, but principles. How to diagnose, how to think through a problem, how to know when something was beyond her skill, and when to trust her instincts. Other young people started showing up, asking to observe. Some lasted a day before the blood and suffering drove them away. Others stayed, hungry to learn. By August, Mara had 4 regular students and a waiting list of others. The mountain was transforming from a refuge into something else, something that drew people instead of repelling them. One evening, Coulter found Mara sitting outside the clinic, watching the sun set. She looked tired but settled, like she'd finally found solid ground beneath her feet. "You're building an empire up here," he said, sitting beside her. "Hardly. Just teaching people who want to learn. It's more than that. You're changing things." "Maybe." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "Or maybe I'm just doing what I should have been allowed to do all along." "Does it feel like you thought it would?" "What do you mean?" "Having what you wanted, respect, recognition, a place that's yours." Mara was quiet for a long time. "It feels strange," she finally said, "like I'm waiting for someone to tell me I can't have it, that it was all a mistake and I need to leave." "No one's going to tell you that. How do you know?" "Because they need you too much now." It was true. The clinic had become essential. When people got sick, they came to the mountain. When women went into labor, they asked for Mara. When injuries happened, her name was the first one spoken. The town had tried to exist without her and found they couldn't. "I'm not used to being needed," Mara said quietly. "I'm used to being tolerated at best, hated at worst. But needed? That's new. Get used to it." She smiled, a real smile, not the careful one she used with patients. "I'm trying." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching darkness settle over the valley. Somewhere down the trail, a night bird called. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. "Thank you," Mara said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing me. When no one else would." Coulter's throat tightened. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You saved my father's life. And you gave me mine back." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them quite knew how to navigate. Coulter wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she'd become more than just the healer who'd saved his father, that somewhere along the way she'd become the center of his world. But the words wouldn't form. Instead, he just sat beside her, their shoulders nearly touching, and let the moment be enough. In September, Catherine Yates went into labor. It was her first child, and she was terrified. Her husband had died 3 weeks earlier, leaving her alone with a baby she didn't know how to raise, and a community that had already started whispering about her situation. The labor was long and difficult. Mara worked for 16 hours straight, coaching Catherine through each contraction, monitoring the baby's position, making decisions that balanced risk against necessity. Coulter stayed close, ready to help if needed. Ruth assisted directly, her young face set in intense concentration. Finally, just before dawn, the baby came, a boy, small but healthy, screaming his fury at the world. Catherine wept when Mara placed him in her arms. "Thank you, thank you." "You did the hard part," Mara said, exhausted but satisfied. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." Word of the successful birth spread quickly. Catherine Yates, the widow of a council member, had delivered a healthy child with Mara's help. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. If Mara was good enough for the Yates family, she was good enough for anybody. The last holdouts in town began to crumble. Ethel Pruitt, who'd been one of Mara's harshest critics, sent her daughter up the mountain for treatment of persistent headaches. The new council members, younger, less rigid than their predecessors, formally thanked Mara for her service to the community. It wasn't perfect. Some people still muttered about impropriety, still looked at Mara with suspicion, but the tide had turned decisively. She was no longer a scandal to be managed. She was a resource to be valued. That winter was gentler than the last. Snow fell, but not in the brutal storms that had nearly buried them. Patients still came, but in manageable numbers. The clinic ran smoothly with Ruth and the other students handling routine cases while Mara focused on the difficult ones. Samuel's health remained strong. He'd put weight back on, his color was good, and he moved with something approaching his old vigor. On clear days, he'd work outside for hours, repairing fences or tending the stock, and come in only slightly winded. "I feel 20 years younger," he told Dr. Marsh during one of the doctor's visits. "You look it too," Marsh said, examining him. "Whatever Miss Vance did, it worked. She gave me a reason to keep fighting. Sometimes that's the best medicine there is." One evening in late December, almost exactly a year after the town had tried to burn them out, they gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. Coulter, Samuel, Mara, Ruth, and a handful of students who'd become like family. "Hard to believe where we were a year ago," Samuel said. "I try not to think about it," Mara replied. "Why not? We survived. That's worth remembering." "Surviving isn't the same as living." "No," Samuel agreed, "but sometimes you have to survive first before you can live. And now we're living." Coulter looked around at the faces gathered on the porch, weathered, worn, but content. They'd built something real up here, something that mattered. Not just the clinic or the house or the physical structures, but a community of people who'd chosen each other when the world had tried to keep them apart. "Dad's right," he said. "We're living." Spring brought new challenges. Ruth announced she was ready to practice on her own and asked Mara's permission to open a clinic in a neighboring valley where medical help was scarce. Mara was both proud and sad to see her go, but she helped Ruth prepare, sharing knowledge and supplies and connections. 2 other students followed Ruth's example, setting up practices in distant towns. They carried Mara's teachings with them, spreading her approach, practical, compassionate, affordable, to places that had never seen it. "You're creating a legacy," Dr. Marsh observed during one of his increasingly frequent visits to the mountain. "I'm just teaching people what I know." That's what a legacy is. Knowledge passed down, values embedded. You're changing how healing works in this whole region. Mara didn't know how to respond to that. She'd never thought of herself as someone who'd leave a mark. She'd always been too busy surviving to consider what might come after. But as she watched her students leave to do good work elsewhere, she began to understand what Marsh meant. She wasn't just healing individual patients. She was creating healers who would heal thousands more. By summer, the mountain clinic had become famous. People traveled from 3 counties away to see Mara or one of her remaining students. The town below, which had once tried to drive her away, now boasted about her. The healer on the mountain was a source of pride, a sign that their community valued skill and compassion over narrow-minded tradition. The transformation was complete, but it hadn't come without cost. Coulter saw the exhaustion in Mara's eyes sometimes, the way she'd stare at her hands after a particularly difficult case. Saving lives took something from you, piece by piece, and eventually you had to reckon with what was left. One afternoon in July, he found her sitting by the creek that ran behind the house, just sitting and staring at the water. "You all right?" he asked. "Tired." "You should rest," I am resting. Coulter sat beside her. That's not what I mean. You should take time, real time. Let the students handle things for a while. They're not ready. They're ready enough. And you're no good to anyone if you burn yourself out. Mara picked up a stone and tossed it into the creek. I don't know how to stop. Then learn, same way you learned everything else. She looked at him sideways. When did you get wise? I've always been wise. You just never noticed. That got a laugh, genuine and surprised. All right, maybe I'll try. True to her word, Mara started taking breaks. At first just an hour here and there, then half days, then full days where she'd leave the clinic to her students and do something, anything, that wasn't work. She and Coulter rode into the high country, exploring valleys neither of them had seen before. They fished in mountain lakes so clear you could see every stone on the bottom. They sat in meadows full of wildflowers and talked about nothing important. Samuel watched them with knowing eyes but said nothing. He'd grown strong enough to work full days again, managing the property with the efficiency of his younger years. Sometimes Coulter would catch his father watching them and see something satisfied in his expression, like a man who'd lived long enough to see things work out right. In August, Mara turned 32. She'd never celebrated birthdays, never saw the point, but Ruth and the other students insisted. They organized a gathering on the mountain, inviting people from the town, from the valley, from all the places Mara had touched. Over 50 people came. They brought food, gifts, stories of how Mara had helped them or someone they loved. Margaret Finch brought her daughter, now healthy and running wild with other children. Catherine Yates brought her son, growing fat and happy. Thomas Webb showed off his healed arm, which worked perfectly despite the severity of the original injury. Dr. Marsh gave a speech about how Mara had changed medicine in the region, how her approach, treating people as people, not just symptoms, had influenced even his own practice. He called her a pioneer, a teacher, and a friend. Mara stood through it all looking uncomfortable and vaguely embarrassed. But when it was over and people were leaving, Coulter saw her pull Ruth aside and hug her tight. Thank you, Mara said. I've never had anything like this. You deserve it, Ruth replied simply. After the last guests left, only Coulter, Samuel, and Mara remained. They sat on the porch in the gathering darkness, exhausted but content. That was something, Samuel said. It was too much, Mara countered. No such thing as too much when it comes to celebrating good people. I'm not that good. The 50 people who showed up today would disagree. Mara shook her head but didn't argue. She looked out at the valley, at the lights beginning to glow in the town below, and something in her expression shifted, softened. I never thought I'd belong anywhere, she said quietly. I spent my whole life being the wrong shape for whatever space I was in. Too tall, too broad, too direct, too much. And then I came here, and she stopped, struggling with words. You made space for me. Not space I had to shrink to fit. Space that was the right shape already. Coulter's chest tightened. You made space for us too. For Dad. For me. For everyone who needed you. That's different. That's just work. No, it's not. It's who you are. Samuel cleared his throat. I'm going to bed. You two figure out whatever this is without me. He disappeared inside, leaving them alone. The silence stretched. Coulter knew he should say something, should put words to the feelings that had been building for months, but vulnerability had never been his strength. Mara spoke first. I think I'm happy. You think? I've never been happy before. Not really. So I'm not sure what it's supposed to feel like. She turned to look at him. But if this isn't it, it's close enough. What does it feel like? Like I can breathe all the way down. Like tomorrow might actually be better than today. Like, she paused. Like, I'm not alone anymore. You're not. I know, that's the part that scares me. Why? Because I don't know how to keep it. Every good thing I've ever had, I've lost. And this? She gestured at the house, the clinic, everything they'd built. This is too good. It feels like it can't last. Coulter understood. He'd felt the same way for months, waiting for the collapse that never came. But Iris had been right. At some point, you had to stop preparing for disaster and start trusting in what you'd built.
Nothing lasts forever, he said, but that doesn't mean it can't last long enough. Long enough for what? For it to matter, for it to be worth having. Mara studied his face in the dim light. You really believe that? I do. Even after everything we went through? Especially after that. We fought for this. We earned it. And we're going to keep it as long as we can. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and took his hand. Her palm was rough and warm, her grip strong. All right, she said. We keep it. They sat like that until the stars came out. Two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and built something worth keeping. The years that followed weren't perfect. There were setbacks, patients who died despite their best efforts, students who couldn't handle the work, winters that tested their resolve. Samuel's health fluctuated, good days mixed with harder ones. The town's acceptance was never complete. There were always people who looked at Mara with suspicion or muttered about impropriety. But the foundation held. The clinic expanded. 2 more buildings went up, allowing them to house more patients and more students. Mara's teaching program became formal, with students coming from hundreds of miles away to study under her. Some stayed for months. Others stayed for years. All of them left changed, carrying her methods and her philosophy into the world. Ruth returned after 5 years with a student of her own, a young man who'd lost his arm in a logging accident and wanted to learn one-handed medicine. Mara took them both in without hesitation, showing the young man that disability didn't mean inability. Dr. Marsh retired and moved his practice to the mountain, saying he was too old to work alone and too stubborn to stop working entirely. He and Mara became partners, their combined knowledge creating something more powerful than either could manage alone. Samuel lived another 12 years after his recovery. He saw his son become a man respected throughout the territory. He saw Mara transform from a desperate healer into a legend. He saw the mountain become a place of healing that drew people from across the region. When he finally died, it was quietly, in his sleep, with Coulter and Mara sitting vigil beside him. His last words were simple. You did good, son. Both of you. They buried him on the mountain, under a pine tree he'd planted the spring after his recovery. The whole town came to the funeral. Even Ethel Pruitt, who'd once called Mara immoral, brought flowers. Coulter took his father's death hard. Mara gave him space to grieve but stayed close, a steady presence when the world felt like it was crumbling. It was Ruth who pointed out what Coulter couldn't see. You gave him 12 more years, she said one afternoon when Coulter was particularly low. 12 years he wouldn't have had without you and Mara. That's not nothing. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it's what you had, and you used it well. The grief eased slowly, the way grief always does. Coulter found himself working more, losing himself in the physical labor of maintaining the property. Mara let him, understanding that some pain had to be worked through with your hands. 2 years after Samuel's death, on a cold morning in early spring, Coulter asked Mara to marry him. They were working in the garden behind the house, preparing the soil for planting. It wasn't romantic. There were no flowers or speeches. He just looked at her, covered in dirt, hair falling loose from its braid, and realized he'd already chosen her years ago. The formality was just catching up. Marry me, he said. Mara stopped digging and stared at him. What? Marry me. Make it official. We've been living together for years. It's already official. Not in the eyes of the law. Not in a way that protects you if something happens to me. Is that why you're asking? For legal protection? No. I'm asking because I want to, because you're my family and I want everyone to know it. Mara planted her shovel in the ground and leaned on it. The town will talk. Let them. They've been talking for years. They'll say I trapped you, that I manipulated you into it. Then we'll prove them wrong, same as always. She searched his face, looking for doubt. You're serious. Completely. Why now? Because Dad's gone and I realized I don't want to waste any more time. Life's too short to wait for the perfect moment. Mara's eyes grew bright. She blinked hard, fighting tears. Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, you stubborn fool. Coulter crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. She was solid and strong, and holding her felt like coming home. They married a month later in a simple ceremony on the mountain. Dr. Marsh officiated. Ruth and the students attended.
Half the town showed up, which was more than either of them expected. There were no fancy clothes or elaborate decorations. Mara wore a simple dress she'd made herself. Coulter wore his best shirt. They spoke their vows standing on the porch of the house they'd defended together, looking out at the valley they'd changed. The words were simple, promises to stand together, to support each other, to keep building what they'd started. Nothing flowery or dramatic, just truth. When it was over, they hosted a gathering that lasted until sunset. People ate, drank, shared stories. Several patients told tales of how Mara had saved their lives, or the lives of their loved ones. Former students talked about what they'd learned. Even a few of the old council members, the ones who'd opposed them so fiercely, came to offer grudging congratulations. As the sun set and people began to leave, Coulter found himself standing with Mara at the edge of the clearing, watching the town lights come on below. "We did it," he said. "Did what?" "Built something that lasted." Mara leaned into him. "We're still building." "Yeah, but it's ours now, really ours, and no one can take it away." She didn't answer, just stood beside him as darkness fell and the stars emerged. The years continued to unfold. The clinic grew into a complex of buildings, treatment rooms, classrooms, housing for students, a library of medical texts that Mara had been collecting. It became known as the Mountain Institute, though Mara hated the formal name and usually just called it the clinic. Students came from further away. Some traveled for weeks to study under Mara. Others sent letters asking for advice on difficult cases. Mara answered every letter personally, sharing what she knew freely. She trained dozens of healers over the decades. Some became famous in their own right. Others worked quietly in remote places where no one would have thought to send a doctor. All of them carried forward the lessons she'd taught them, that healing was about seeing people, not just symptoms, about respecting patients, not just treating them, about making medicine accessible, not exclusive. The town below transformed too. The old guard died or moved away, replaced by younger people who'd grown up with the Mountain Institute as part of their landscape. To them, Mara wasn't a scandal. She was just the healer on the mountain, a fixture, someone they'd always known. Ruth eventually took over much of the daily teaching, freeing Mara to focus on the hardest cases and the most advanced students. Dr. Marsh passed away at 87, leaving his entire medical library to the Institute. They built a wing in his honor. Coulter and Mara never had children of their own, but they raised dozens. Every student who came through became part of their family. Some stayed in touch for years. Others drifted away only to reappear decades later with their own children, wanting to show them where they'd learned to heal. On her 60th birthday, the territory's governor came to the mountain to present Mara with a formal commendation for her contributions to medicine. She accepted it with characteristic discomfort, gave a short speech about how healing was a communal effort, and then went back to work. "You could have enjoyed that more," Coulter told her afterward. "I enjoyed it fine, but there's a kid in the clinic with a fever that won't break, and she needs me more than I need a fancy certificate." That was Mara. Always had been. Always would be. The final years came gently. Mara worked until her hands grew too stiff to stitch wounds properly, then focused on teaching. Coulter's hair went white, his back stooped, but he still walked the property every morning, checking fences and feeding stock. They grew old together on the mountain they'd fought to keep, surrounded by the community they'd built against impossible odds. One spring morning, when Mara was 74 and Coulter was 76, they sat on the porch watching the sun rise over the valley. The Institute building spread out below them, smoke rising from the chimneys where early rising students were making breakfast. "Do you ever regret it?" Coulter asked. "What?" "All of it. The fighting, the struggle, everything we went through." Mara thought for a long moment. "No, not even the worst parts. Because the worst parts made the good parts possible." "That's very wise." "I'm very old. I'm allowed to be wise." Coulter laughed. "You were wise at 32. You just didn't know it yet." "Neither did you." "No, but I knew you were worth fighting for." "Was I?" "You still are." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the world wake up. Students emerged from the dormitory, heading toward the clinic. Smoke from the valley meant the town was stirring. Birds sang in the pines. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built, everything they'd survived, it was all still here. Changed, evolved, but fundamentally the same. A place where people who didn't fit anywhere else could find their shape. A place where healing mattered more than propriety. A place where courage meant standing your ground when the whole world told you to move. "Thank you," Mara said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible, for standing beside me when I stood alone, for giving me a place to become who I was supposed to be." Coulter took her hand, still strong despite the arthritis, still capable despite the years. "You gave me the same thing. We gave each other a lot." "Yeah, we did." The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Down in the valley, the town came fully awake. And up on the mountain, two people who'd refused to bend sat together and watched the world they'd changed keep turning. They'd started as strangers brought together by desperation. They'd become allies fighting a common enemy. And they'd ended as partners who'd built something that would outlast them both. The Mountain Institute would continue long after they were gone. The students they'd trained would train others. The methods they'd pioneered would spread further. The values they'd stood for, dignity, compassion, courage, would carry forward. But in that moment, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact of sitting together in the morning sun, alive and together and content. Coulter had once told Mara that nothing lasted forever, but some things lasted long enough to matter. They'd proven that true. Their lives had mattered. Their choices had mattered. Their refusal to quit when quitting was easier had mattered. And that, in the end, was enough. Years later, when students at the Institute told the story of how it all began, they'd speak of a man who refused everything until he found exactly what he needed. They'd speak of a woman nobody wanted who became irreplaceable. They'd speak of a mountain that became a refuge, of a town that learned to see differently, of two people who stood together when standing alone would have been easier. The details would shift with each telling, facts would blur into legend, but the core truth would remain. That courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about standing your ground when fear tells you to run. That value isn't found in appearances or conventions. It's found in action, in commitment, in the choice to see what matters and fight for it. And that sometimes, when the world tells you you're wrong, the most radical thing you can do is prove you're right by simply refusing to quit. That was the legacy of Coulter Hale and Mara Vance. Not perfection, not ease, just stubborn, determined, relentless refusal to let the world tell them who they were allowed to be. And in the end, that made all the difference.